the marriage, sitting there untouched. And still, every single night, the prayer goes up anyway. Bless it, God, bless it. Like the blessing is supposed to reach into a drawer nobody's opened and pull something out that was never put in. That is not how this works. And I want to correct something that I believe has been taught wrong to an entire generation of believers, something that has quietly wrecked more destinies than laziness ever could on its own. Because most of you are not lazy people. Most of you are tired people. Most of you are people who started strong and got distracted, or started strong and got discouraged, or started strong and got scared halfway through and called it waiting on God, when really it was just fear wearing a spiritual costume. Here's the correction. Favor does not fall on you by accident. Favor is not weather. Favor is not luck. Favor is not a random cloud that happens to open up over some people's lives and skip everybody else's. That is not what the Bible teaches, and it is not what tonight is about. Favor chases down a life that is already moving. Read that title again, The 3 Hidden Habits That Make God's Favor Chase You Down. Chase you down. Not fall on you. Not land on you by chance. Chase you. And you cannot be chased if you are not moving. You cannot be overtaken if you are standing still. Write this down, because we are going to come back to it tonight. Deuteronomy chapter 28 verse 2 says, "And all these blessings shall come on thee and overtake thee if thou shalt hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy God." Overtake. That word means favor is running after obedience. Favor is chasing something that is already in motion. It is not chasing something that is lying in bed at 11:47 p.m., scrolling, still, silent, stuck. So here is the question I need to plant in your spirit tonight. And I need you to let this question follow you all the way to your car, all the way to your pillow, all the way into tomorrow morning when the alarm goes off and you have to decide who you're going to be. What if the very thing you've been praying for is waiting on a habit, not a miracle? Say that back to yourself slowly. What if it's not waiting on a miracle? What if it's waiting on a habit? What if the breakthrough you've been begging God for isn't stuck behind some spiritual wall that only a supernatural event can break down? What if it's stuck behind something as ordinary, as unglamorous, as small as what you do at 6 a.m. tomorrow? What if God isn't withholding the miracle? What if God is waiting for the movement? Because here's what I know about the God we serve. He is not confused about your calling. He knows exactly what He put in you before you were formed. Jeremiah tells us that before I formed thee in the belly, I knew thee. He is not up in heaven scratching his head, wondering what to do with your life. He already knows. He already planned it. He is not the one who's lost. You are not lost either. Let's be honest about that too. You are not lost. You are just still. And tonight we are not here to condemn the stillness. We are not here to shame anybody for the 4 months or the 4 years or the season you can't even talk about without your voice cracking. We are here because I believe, no, I know, that there are 3 habits, 3 quiet, hidden, almost invisible habits, that once you start walking in them, favor will stop waiting to be asked and will start running to catch up with you. But before we get to the habits, I need you to feel the gap. I need you to feel the distance between the person lying in that bed at 11:47 p.m. and the person God already called you to be, because you cannot fix a gap you refuse to feel. And for the next few minutes, we are going to sit in that gap together, honestly, without excuses, without the church answers we give too quickly, because some of you have gotten so good at sounding spiritual about your stagnation that you've actually started to believe your own excuses. Not tonight. Tonight, we're going to call it what it is. And here's the man who had every reason in the world to feel like God had passed him by. He wasn't famous. He wasn't a prophet. He wasn't a king. He was just a young shepherd boy, the youngest of 8 brothers, so overlooked that when the prophet Samuel came to his own house looking for the next king of Israel, his own father didn't even bother calling him in from the field. Read it for yourself. 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 11. Samuel asks Jesse, "Are here all thy children?" And Jesse says, almost as an afterthought, "There remaineth yet the youngest, and behold, he keepeth the sheep." Behold, he keepeth the sheep. Nobody even thought to bring him inside. That's a lonely kind of overlooked. But here's what David was doing while everybody else was inside getting measured, getting considered, getting looked over for the promotion he didn't even know was happening. He was in a field alone with sheep that couldn't clap for him, couldn't repost him, couldn't validate a single thing he did out there, and he was killing lions. He was killing bears with his bare hands with a rock with nothing but discipline. Nobody was watching. Samuel chapter 17, verse 34 to 36, David tells Saul himself, "Thy servant kept his father's sheep, and there came a lion and a bear and took a lamb out of the flock, and I went out after him and smote him and delivered it out of his mouth." Nobody clapped for that. Nobody filmed that. There was no launch party for that lion, no engagement photos for that bear. And that's the gap I need you to feel tonight, because most of us are only willing to fight when somebody's watching. Most of us will show up for the version of discipline that gets noticed, that gets praised, that gets posted. But the field, the place where nobody sees you, that's where most of us go quiet. That's where most of us go soft. That's where the goal sits in the folder called later for 2 years, because there's no applause in the folder. There's no likes in the first draft. There's no crown waiting for you at 5 a.m. when the bed is warm and the room is dark. And it would be so easy to just stay under the covers one more morning. So let's talk honestly about where some of you actually are. Some of you have a business plan sitting in a folder on your laptop right now. I want you to picture the folder. I want you to picture the little icon sitting there untouched. And you named that folder something hopeful 2 years ago. 2 years. And every few months you open it, you scroll through it, you feel that little spark, and then you close it again and go back to scrolling somebody else's launch. Some of you have restarted the same fitness goal every January 1st for the last 5 years. New year, new gym membership, new meal plan, new playlist, and by the second week of February, the gym bag is back in the closet. And the only thing consistent about your discipline is how consistently it disappears. Some of you have reduced your entire relationship with the living God to a 5-minute apology prayer whispered into a pillow right before you fall asleep. Lord, forgive me for today. I'll do better tomorrow. And tomorrow comes and the 5 minutes happens again. And somewhere along the way, you stop noticing that a relationship reduced to an apology isn't a relationship anymore. It's a transaction. And some of you, this one's going to sting a little, so brace yourself. Some of you are gifted, genuinely gifted. You can sing, you can write, you can lead, you can build. And you are more comfortable watching somebody else's testimony on a screen than you are building your own. Because if you never really try, you never really have to face the possibility of failing at the thing you were made for. It's safer to admire somebody else's harvest than to risk planting your own field and watching nothing come up. I need you to hear where all of this comes from, because it's not laziness the way we've been taught to shame it. There's a word for it in Scripture, and it's not lazy. It's double-minded. James chapter 1 verse 8, a double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. Not evil, not even weak necessarily, just divided. Half of you wants the goal and half of you is scrolling past somebody else's version of it. And a person split in half like that cannot build anything, because you cannot build with a divided attention span. Instability isn't a character flaw God is disgusted by. It's a diagnosis. And tonight we're not here to shame the diagnosis. We're here to treat it. So let's go back to Proverbs, because I promised you the ant, and the ant is not done teaching us yet. Proverbs chapter 6 verse 6 to 8. Go to the ant, thou sluggard. Consider her ways and be wise, which having no guide, overseer, or ruler, provideth her meat in the summer, and gathereth her food in the harvest. Now here's what I need you to catch. Nobody is standing over that ant with a clipboard. Now here's what I need you to catch. Nobody is standing over that ant with a clipboard. Nobody is posting motivational content for that ant. There is no algorithm cheering that ant on. No guide, no overseer, no ruler. And yet in the summer, in the season when it would be easiest to do nothing, when the sun is out and life feels easy and there's no urgency, that ant is already gathering for a winter it cannot yet see. Nobody is chasing the ant. The ant is chasing the harvest. And that's the whole problem with how we've been praying. We've been lying in bed at 11:47 p.m. asking God to chase us down with a blessing while we lie completely still. When the truth I need this room to receive tonight is that God is not confused about your calling. He knew you in the belly. He planned the good works before you took your first breath. He is not up in heaven wondering what to do with you. You are not confused about your calling either, if you're honest. You are confused about your consistency. That's the gap. That's the real gap. It was never a mystery of purpose. It's a crisis of follow-through. And tonight we are going to close that gap. Not with more guilt, not with more shame, not with another sermon that makes you feel bad for 24 hours and then wears off by Tuesday. We are going to close it with 3 habits so practical, so ordinary, so almost too simple that once you start walking in them, favor is going to stop waiting for your prayer and start chasing your feet. But before we get there, I need you to sit in this gap a little longer, because there's one more thing eating at some of you in this room. And it's not laziness, and it's not distraction, it's fear. And fear has its own habits. Fear has its own field. And that's exactly where we're headed next. Let's talk about the first hidden habit, the one that changes everything and yet looks so small most people walk right past it without noticing what they've missed. The habit of small obedience, not big obedience, not the dramatic mountaintop, everybody's watching kind of obedience. Small obedience, the kind that happens in a room with no cameras, no crowd, no witnesses except you and God. And I need you to understand tonight that this is where favor is actually born, not in the moment everybody sees you succeed, but in the 1,000 moments before that, when nobody was looking and you did the right thing anyway. Zechariah chapter 4 verse 10 asks a question that I think about all the time. Who hath despised the day of small things? Who looked at the small day, the ordinary Tuesday, the unremarkable 6 a.m., and decided it wasn't worth their effort? Because I want to tell you something plainly. Favor does not skip the small day on its way to the big one. Favor is built by the small day. There is no big breakthrough that didn't have 100 small unnoticed mornings underneath it, holding it up like a foundation nobody sees once the building is finished. And Jesus said it even more directly. Luke chapter 16 verse 10. He that is faithful in that which is least is faithful also in much. Read that again. Not he that is faithful in that which is great, faithful in that which is least. The small thing is the test. The small thing is the qualifying round. God is not auditioning you for the mountain. He's watching what you do in the valley when nobody's applauding, because that's the only accurate preview of what you'll do once the applause starts. Think about David again, but this time not the lion, not the bear. Think about the moment he actually gets the opportunity. Goliath is standing there, 9 feet of armor and mockery, and everybody in Israel's army is frozen, including grown men who had trained for war their whole lives. And David steps up. Why? Because 1 Samuel chapter 17 verse 37, David says it himself. The Lord that delivered me out of the paw of the lion and out of the paw of the bear, he will deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine. Notice what he's doing. He's not hoping for courage he's never had before. He's remembering the private discipline that already proved itself in the field. The public deliverance didn't create the faith. The private obedience did. The moment with Goliath was just the first time anybody else got to see what had already been true about David for years. And here's where I need to get honest with you, because this is where so many of us get stuck. Some of you have been praying for the open door, the opportunity, the platform, the interview, the promotion, and I believe some of you are about to get it. I believe God is going to open a door for some people in this room sooner than you think. But here's the danger. What happens when the door finally opens and you freeze? What happens when the opportunity arrives and you realize you prayed for the door for 2 years but never once practiced in the hallway? I've seen it happen. The person finally gets the meeting they've been asking God for, and they walk in unprepared. Because all that time waiting, they were waiting instead of working. They were praying for the assignment instead of rehearsing for it. And the door closes again, not because God changed his mind, but because the small obedience was never built to carry the weight of the big moment. So let me say something that I need you to write down, because I believe it's one of the most important sentences of the entire night. Your 5 a.m. is more prophetic than your Sunday altar call. Say that with me. Your 5 a.m. is more prophetic than your Sunday altar call. What you do when no one is watching is what qualifies you for what everyone will see. The altar call is emotional. It's real. It matters. Don't misunderstand me. But the altar call is a moment. Your 5 a.m. is a pattern. And God isn't building your future off a moment. He's building it off a pattern. So I want to ask you something, and I want you to actually answer it in your own heart right now, not perform an answer for the person next to you. What is the small obedience you've been skipping? Maybe it's the devotion time you keep pushing to later and later never comes. Maybe it's the budget you know you need to sit down and actually look at, but you'd rather not know the number. Maybe it's the apology text sitting in your drafts unsent because sending it means admitting you were wrong. Maybe it's the first draft, the first page, the first verse, the first client email, the thing that isn't hard because it's complicated. It's hard because it's just uncomfortable to start. Name it, Right now, in your own mind, don't say it out loud, just name it. Because that thing you just named, that is not a small thing to God. That is the exact place he is waiting to meet you. That is the field. That is the lion and the bear. That is the small day Zechariah asked about, the least thing Jesus talked about, the private discipline that David stood on when the giant showed up. And once you start walking in that, once small obedience becomes your habit instead of your exception, you are no longer standing still, waiting for favor to notice you. You are moving, and favor cannot resist a life that's moving in obedience. It has to catch up to you. It has to overtake you. That's the promise in Deuteronomy 28 verse 2 again. Overtake, and overtaking only happens to something already in motion. Small obedience is the first engine. It's the quiet one. It's the one nobody claps for. But it's the one that starts everything else. Now, once obedience is moving, there's a second enemy waiting right around the corner. One that's already stolen more destinies than laziness ever did. And that's where we're headed next. Let's talk about the second hidden habit. And this one is sneaky because it doesn't always look like sin. Sometimes it looks like inspiration. Sometimes it looks like ambition. Sometimes it even looks spiritual. The habit of sustained focus. I want to start with Paul because Paul understood something about focus that most of us have never fully grasped. Philippians chapter 3 verse 13 to 14, he says, forgetting those things which are behind and reaching forth unto those things which are before, I press toward the mark for the prize of the high calling of God in Christ Jesus. Notice the order. Forgetting what's behind, reaching toward what's ahead, pressing toward one mark, not 6 marks, not a dozen open tabs of purpose, all competing for the same attention. One mark. Now, here's the honest question I need to ask this room. How many of you are currently pressing toward 4 or 5 different marks at the same time and calling it multitasking when really it's just a nicer word for scattered? Let me paint a picture because I think a lot of you are about to recognize yourself. There's an entrepreneur, and this could just as easily be a student, a ministry leader, a parent trying to build something on the side. And this entrepreneur has 4 half-finished projects sitting in different corners of their life right now. The online store that got built halfway and abandoned. The course that got recorded halfway and never edited. The book that got outlined but never written past chapter 2. The idea from 3 weeks ago that felt like the one until a newer idea showed up and felt even more like the one. And here's the deception in it. It doesn't feel like failure while it's happening. It feels like passion. It feels like creativity. It feels like being led. Every new idea shows up dressed as inspiration. And it feels so much more exciting than the current project, which by now has hit the boring middle part, the part where the newness has worn off, and all that's left is the actual work. So the entrepreneur abandons Project 3 for the excitement of Project 4, and Project 4 will get abandoned the moment Project 5 shows up, looking shinier. That is distraction disguised as inspiration, and it will keep you busy your entire life while you finish nothing. Now, I need to be careful here because I don't want you to leave tonight thinking every closed door, every redirected plan, every unfinished season was your fault. That's not what I'm saying. Hebrews chapter 12 verse 1 to 2 says, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which doth so easily beset us, looking unto Jesus. Notice it doesn't just say sin, it says weight. Not everything pulling on your attention is evil. Some of it is simply heavy. Some of it is a good thing that just isn't your thing right now. Some relationships, some opportunities, some responsibilities are not sinful, they're just weight, and weight slows down a runner just as effectively as chains do, even if it's a much nicer looking weight. So sustained focus isn't just about resisting evil. It's about being honest enough to say, this is a good thing, but it's not the thing, and I have to lay it down if I'm going to run this race with my eyes fixed on Jesus, instead of fixed on everything else calling for my attention. Now let's talk about the other thief of focus, and this one might be the loudest one in the room tonight because it lives inside almost everybody's pocket. Comparison. Galatians chapter 6 verse 4 says something that I think the modern church has quietly ignored. Let every man prove his own work, and then shall he have rejoicing in himself alone and not in another. Prove your own work, not somebody else's work, not the version of success you saw at 11:47 p.m. on somebody else's account. Your own work. And here's the piece that convicts me every time I read it. Comparison isn't just discouraging. According to this verse, Comparison is disobedient. It's borrowing a race that was never assigned to you and using it to measure a race that was... Think about Peter. Matthew chapter 14, verse 29 to 30. Jesus tells him to come, and Peter actually does something almost nobody else in that boat was willing to do. He steps out of the boat onto water, actually walking toward Jesus. And then verse 30 says, but when he saw the wind boisterous, he was afraid. He didn't sink because the water changed. He sank because his focus changed. He shifted his attention from the face in front of him to the storm around him, and the moment comparison, the moment measuring his situation against something outside of Jesus, entered his focus, his feet started going down. That's what comparison does to you. It doesn't have to be dramatic. You don't have to fall apart all at once. You just shift your eyes for a second off your own calling, off your own pace, off the face of the one who called you out of the boat in the first place and onto somebody else's launch, somebody else's ring, somebody else's promotion, and you start sinking in a storm that was never even blowing at you. It was blowing at somebody else's boat. Now, I do want to give you something important because focus and delay get confused all the time, and this confusion has crushed a lot of good people. Not every closed door is a distraction you failed to resist. Sometimes a closed door is protection, not punishment. Sometimes the version of the plan you wanted didn't open because God was redirecting you to something that hadn't been revealed yet. The test is this: are you still pressing toward the mark, even if the mark looks different than you expected? Or have you quietly stopped pressing altogether and started calling your stillness waiting on God because it sounds more spiritual than admitting you got distracted? So here's your assignment before we move forward tonight, and I want you to actually do this, not just hear it. Name the tab you need to close in your life this week. Maybe it's literal, an account you follow that quietly makes you compare your beginning to somebody else's highlight reel. Maybe it's a project that's just weight, a good thing that isn't your thing right now, and you've been feeling guilty for wanting to lay it down. Maybe it's a storm you've been staring at instead of the face of the one who told you to come. Name it, close it, not because it's evil, because it's heavy, and you were never called to run this race carrying everybody else's race on your back too. Small obedience gets you moving. Sustained focus keeps you moving in one direction instead of five. But there's one more habit left, and it might be the most important one of all. Because even the most obedient, most focused person on earth is going to face a moment where they simply run out of motivation. And what you do in that moment is what habit number 3 is all about. Now let's talk about the third hidden habit. And I want to warn you before we even start, this one is going to feel different than the first two, because this one isn't really about trying harder. This one is about what happens after you've already tried, already given everything, and you have nothing left. The habit of relentless return. Galatians chapter 6, verse 9. I want you to hold on to this one tightly because I believe some of you needed this verse before you even walked in this building tonight. Let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap if we faint not. Read that carefully. It doesn't say if we never get tired. It says let us not be weary. Meaning weariness is expected. Weariness is normal. Weariness is going to show up. The command isn't never feel tired. The command is don't let the tiredness become the reason you quit before the season turns. Proverbs chapter 24 verse 16 puts it even plainer. A just man falleth 7 times and riseth up again. 7 times. Not 0 times, not 1 time, 7. The righteous person in this verse isn't the one who never falls. The righteous person is simply the one who keeps rising. Favor was never reserved for the person who never stumbles. Favor is reserved for the person who refuses to stay down. I want to talk honestly about burnout tonight because I think the church has done some people a disservice by only having one category for anyone who's slowed down, lazy. And some of you in this room are not lazy. You are depleted. There is a difference, and I need you to hear that difference clearly because false guilt has kept more good people stuck than actual laziness ever has. Think about the caregiver who's been managing a parent's illness for 2 years, showing up every single day exhausted, unseen, unpaid, unapplauded. Think about the single parent working a shift job, coming home to make dinner, help with homework, and collapse into bed just to wake up and do it again with no partner to tap out to. Think about the person working overnight shifts who is trying to build something during daylight hours their body was never designed to be awake for. These are not lazy people. These are depleted people. And depletion doesn't need shame. Depletion needs rest. Which brings me to one of the most human moments in all of Scripture, Elijah, right after the greatest victory of his entire ministry. He just called down fire from heaven in front of an entire nation. He just watched God prove himself undeniably, publicly, dramatically. And one chapter later, 1 Kings chapter 19, verse 4 to 8, Elijah is sitting under a juniper tree and he says, "It is enough. Now, O Lord, take away my life." The man who just witnessed fire fall from the sky is now asking God to let him die. That's how real burnout is. It doesn't ask permission. It doesn't wait for a convenient season. It can show up right after your biggest victory because your body and your spirit don't know the difference between a good kind of exhausted and a bad kind. Tired is tired. Now notice what God does not do in that moment. God does not rebuke him. God does not say, "After everything I just did for you, this is how you respond." God does not quote him a verse about weariness in well-doing. God sends an angel, and the angel does something almost embarrassingly simple. Verse 5 says, the angel touched him and said, "Arise and eat." Then he laid down again. Then the angel touched him a second time and said, "Arise and eat, because the journey is too great for thee." And Elijah ate and rested, and eventually only after the food and the rest got up and kept walking. God's first response to burnout was never a rebuke. It was food. It was rest. It was a whisper on a mountain, not a lightning bolt of correction. And I need some of you to release the guilt you've been carrying about needing rest, as if rest itself is the enemy of your calling. Rest is not the opposite of discipline. Rest is part of sustainable discipline. The juniper tree wasn't the sin. Staying under the juniper tree forever, that would have been the sin. So here is the line I need you to hold on to tonight, the one that captures this entire habit in a single sentence. Motivation was never designed to carry you the whole way. Motivation is a starter, it's a spark. It gets you out of the bed the first few mornings. It gets you excited about the goal. It gets you talking about it to everybody who will listen. But motivation runs out. It always runs out. That's not a flaw in you. That's just what motivation is. A feeling, and feelings are not built for endurance. Discipline is what's left standing when motivation is already checked out and gone home. And here's the part that should shift something in you tonight. Discipline, that quiet, unglamorous, unmotivated decision to get back up one more time, is the very thing favor has been watching for the entire time. Not your emotion, not your excitement, your return. Some of you are in a juniper tree season right now. You're not lazy, you're not backslidden, you're not failing God. You are simply exhausted and you needed permission tonight to rest without shame. Take the rest, eat the meal, let the angel touch you twice if that's what it takes. But hear the rest of Elijah's story too. After the rest, he got up, he didn't build a house under that tree, he didn't move in. The rest had a beginning and it had an end. And when the end came, he kept walking toward the assignment that was still waiting for him. That's the third habit, not perfection. Not never falling, just relentless return. 7 times, 70 times, however many times it takes. Because in due season, if you don't quit, you will reap. Small obedience gets you moving. Sustained focus keeps you moving in the right direction. Relentless return makes sure that nothing, not distraction, not failure, not exhaustion gets the final word over your life. Now we're going to bring all 3 of these together, and I want to show you what happens in the life of a person who starts walking in all 3 at once, because something in you is about to shift. Here's what I want you to picture, and I want you to actually let yourself picture it, not just hear it as a nice illustration. Picture the same person from the very beginning of tonight, 11:47 p.m., phone in hand, scrolling, 4 months untouched. Now fast forward 6 months, same person, different night. And this time when you look at their life, here's what you see. You see somebody who's been quietly obedient in the small hours, nobody applauded. The early mornings, the unglamorous discipline, the devotion time that finally became a rhythm instead of a rare event. You see somebody who closed the tabs, literally and figuratively, who stopped measuring their beginning against somebody else's highlight reel, who laid down the good things that were just weight, and kept their eyes fixed on one mark instead of 5 scattered ones. And you see somebody who fell, because they did fall more than once, but who kept returning, kept rising, kept eating the meal and getting back up off the juniper tree instead of moving in under it permanently. That is not a fantasy. That is not a someday maybe version of somebody special. That's just what obedience, focus, and return look like after enough time has passed for them to compound. Nothing mystical happened to that person. They didn't get a different anointing than you have right now. They just stopped waiting to feel ready and started moving. And here's what I need you to understand before we close tonight. The reason this works is not because discipline earns favor like a paycheck. It's because favor was already assigned to the plan. You just weren't walking in it yet. Ephesians chapter 2 verse 10 says it plainly. For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus unto good works, which God hath before ordained that we should walk in them. Read that carefully. Before ordained, the works were already prepared before you ever showed up to do them. God isn't sitting in heaven trying to figure out what to do with you. He already finished that part. He already planned the business, the ministry, the marriage, the healing, the book, the calling, all of it before you took your first breath. The only thing that was ever missing was the walking. So let's go back to that verse we opened with because I told you we'd return to it. Deuteronomy chapter 28 verse 2, all these blessings shall come on thee and overtake thee if thou shalt hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy God. Overtake, not fall on you while you sleep, not land on you while you scroll. Overtake, meaning it's running after something already in motion. You were never supposed to sit still and wait to be blessed. You were supposed to start walking in what was already prepared and let favor catch up to your feet. You've been asking God to bless a version of you that hasn't shown up yet. Let that sentence do its work in you for a second. Not shaming you, clarifying you. The version of you that finishes the business plan. The version of you that shows up to the gym in February the same way you did on January 1st. The version of you whose relationship with God isn't a 5-minute apology, but an actual daily walk. The version of you who stopped watching everybody else's harvest and finally planted your own field. That version of you is not a stranger. That version of you is not somebody you have to become through some dramatic transformation. That version of you is just the version who finally started walking in what was already prepared. One small obedience, one guarded focus, one relentless return at a time. That version of you is available starting tomorrow morning. And I don't want you to leave here tonight just emotionally moved, feeling something for 24 hours and then forgetting it by next Tuesday. I want you to leave here equipped. So before we close, I'm going to give you 3 things, real, practical, doable, tomorrow morning things that turn everything we've talked about tonight into forward motion instead of just a good feeling. I'm going to give you 3 things tonight, not 7, not 10, 3, because that's exactly how many hidden habits we've talked about. And I want you walking out of here with one clear action for each one. The first one small obedience before noon. That's it. Before the distractions of the day get a vote, before the phone gets a vote, before your excuses have time to organize themselves into something reasonable sounding, do one thing connected to what God called you to. Open the folder. Write the paragraph, send the apology, read the word before you read the news. It doesn't have to be big. Zechariah already told us, don't despise the day of small things. Just make sure it happens before noon. Because the longer you wait in a day, the more permission you give the day to talk you out of it. The second one tab closed. Every single day, close one thing that's stealing your focus. Mute the account that makes you compare your beginning to somebody else's highlight reel. Say no to the good thing that's just wait right now. Stop staring at the wind and put your eyes back on the face that called you out of the boat in the first place. Pull press toward 1 mark, not 5. Pick yours and protect it like it's the only one that matters, because for you it is. And the third one return after failure. No matter how the day goes, no matter how many times you scroll when you shouldn't, skip when you shouldn't, sink when you shouldn't, before you close your eyes tonight, come back to the goal. Even for 5 minutes. Even just enough to prove to yourself that the fall didn't get the final word. That's what Proverbs meant. A just man falls 7 times and rises again. It's not the falling that defines you. Small obedience before noon, 1 tab closed, 1 return before you sleep, 3 habits every single day. That's not motivation. Motivation was never built to carry you the whole way. That's discipline. And discipline is exactly what favor has been watching for. Galatians chapter 6 verse 9, one more time, and I want you to hear it not as a warning this time, but as a promise being spoken directly over your life. Let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap if we faint not. In due season, not maybe, not if you're lucky. In due season, you will reap. The only condition is that you don't quit before the season turns. So let's go back one more time to where we started tonight, 11:47 p.m. Phone in hand, somebody else's harvest lighting up a dark room, and your own field sitting untouched. I want you to picture that scene differently now. I want you to picture the phone going down, not in shame, not in defeat, but in quiet confidence, because today something got touched that had been sitting untouched for months. I want you to picture the light going off, not because the day ran out, but because the day was actually used. I want you to picture that same person waking up tomorrow, not scrolling for somebody else's proof that God still shows up, but building their own. That's who you already are underneath the 4 months. That's who you already are underneath the folder, the gym bag, the pillow prayer. The fear dressed up as patience. Favor is not looking for your perfection tonight. It never was. Favor is looking for your movement. So get up, get moving, and let it catch you. I'm not going to pray a fancy prayer to close tonight. I'm just going to ask God to cover you as you walk out of here and back into a life that's about to look different than it did when you walked in. Father, for everyone in this room carrying a folder they haven't opened, a goal they've restarted too many times to count, a fear they've dressed up as wisdom, meet them tomorrow morning before noon. Meet them in the small obedience.